We're entering into a brand new series this morning. So we just finished up the Apostles' Creed, and now we're going into a series on three big questions about the Christian faith, about God and the Bible and Jesus and the meaning of life. And this really comes from questions that I had when I was growing up. See, I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and for the most part, I really didn't think of Christianity. I thought it was all a waste of time and silliness, and you'd flip on the channel, and there'd be some guy sort of sweating and yelling and making a spectacle of himself. And I just thought that's what Christianity was, and it seemed, irrelevant, not very intellectually fulfilling, and probably not true, and kind of easy and fun to make fun of, to be honest. And so I really didn't think of Christianity very much. But when I did, I usually thought of three questions. And so these questions were, is it true? How would I know whether this thing was actually true? Because if it's not true, then it's a waste of time. But if it is true, that changes everything. And then I'd think, well, is it good? Is this something that's good for the world, for the people around me? Is this something that I would want other people to believe? What about all the wars that have been caused in the name of religion? What about all the things that people have done? What about all those things? And so I would ask, is it good? And then the third question I would ask, because I had a Baptist grandma who would bring me out to Bible camp once a year when I was very, very little. And so I would hear some of the stories, some of the things, and I would think, well, even if it's true and it's good, I guess, is this really meaningful? Is this something that's going to be exciting for life? Or does it seem boring? Does it seem irrelevant? Does it seem like something that I should just push off to the end of my life until I've done all the fun stuff and then I can do the Jesus stuff, right? A little chuckle. Some of you guys have encountered that before. And so that kind of brings us to the three big questions. Is it true? Is it good? And is it meaningful? What do we believe about the Christian faith? And so today we are talking about the question, is it true? Now, I don't know what all of your backgrounds are. My background comes from a non-Christian home, although I had a Baptist grandma who prayed for me every day, and she actually got to see me come to faith before she passed away. Her son, my dad, actually also became a Christian. She never got to see that, so she prayed faithfully for that every day of her life, and then after she had passed away, her prayers were answered. I think that's pretty amazing. So I grew up in all of this, and in all of this, sort of going about life and living, kind of whatever came my way, and then had these questions. And then when I became a Christian, there was a really emotional moment. There was a youth center that I was attending. There was a guy in the back of this youth center on a Saturday night, started praying with me. And he said, "Do you want to pray?" And he was a big guy. So I said, "Sure, yes, yeah, yes, sir." Right? Big guy. "Do you want to pray?" Okay. And so he said, "Okay, come here, let's pray." And we go into this football huddle style, prayer thing. And I go, "I hope he doesn't crush me." And his name's Josh. He's a great guy, by the way. And so he starts praying, and he's praying essentially the prayer of salvation, of coming to know Jesus and saying, "You've done this." The only problem is I hadn't done that. So he prays that, and he says, "Okay, now you pray." And he says, "Pray in your own words." And it just came out of me. God, thank you for creating me. Thank you that you gave me my life. Thank you that you sent your son Jesus to die on the cross for me. I had no intention going into that prayer to actually be a Christian. And I came out of it having faith in God. So I say that faith happened to me. And that was really exciting for about a week or 2 weeks. And then what happened is I come from a debating background. I was part of a team in high school where they would give you an issue and you would have to go into a room and you would have to debate it one way and argue and win. And then you'd have to finish that, go into the next room, argue against everything you just said, argue completely the opposite, and win and do that over and over for a whole afternoon. And so what happened was you got really good at analyzing an issue from different sides and seeing different angles on things. And sometimes you'd come into things being like, "I'm very convinced of this," and you'd look at it from both sides, and then you'd see the nuances, or you'd maybe even flip and say, "Actually, I kind of think the opposite." And so I had that mindset coming into me when I was kind of examining my newfound faith. And so I made it about 2 weeks of, wow, this is really exciting. And then I had this thought, what if I've joined a cult? What if, right? You never know, right? Everyone's nice. We're all drinking the same Kool-Aid. We're all wearing the same matching white sneakers. And then it all goes horribly wrong, right? I don't know. And so So, am I in a cult? Am I in some, how do I even know this is true? And I realized I didn't even know whether this was true. And so I went off to the library and I started reading books from different perspectives. And then I found a Christian bookstore and I lost all of my money from my first job because I just bought books all the time, which has continued. And as I began to examine, it wasn't after very long that I started reading people arguing against Christianity, and I started to see they might have a point here or there, but things really seemed to fall apart. And then I'd go and I'd pray and I'd think and I'd read these other people who are showing the truth of the Christian faith, and I thought, there's some things I never really knew before, and that makes perfect sense. It all ties together. And so what I'm going to do this morning is I'm actually going to give us, I'm going to go really, 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 really fast. I'm going to give us today a bit of a map of what it means to go, say, from no faith at all to faith in Jesus. Now, just a verse to read through quickly before we do that is Hebrews chapter 11. We actually read this a few weeks ago, and it defines faith. Okay. So Hebrews chapter 11, starting at verse 1, it says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. It is the conviction of things not seen. For by it," that is faith, "for by faith the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible." And go down to verse 6. "Without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him." Okay, so the one who draws near to God must believe that he exists and believe that he is a rewarder of the one who seeks him. And so what happens if you don't believe in God? You don't believe that he exists. That's not a conviction that you hold. Where, if you start there, where would you begin to see that that breaks down, or that there might be something that would challenge that? So many times we might talk to someone who is at a certain point in their faith journey and we try to connect them to the next step. But the next step isn't actually faith in Jesus. They might deny the existence of God at all. And so what happens there? Well, first you need to establish, what if there is something more? What if there's a God who exists? What if there's something behind the universe that just makes sense? So step one, from atheist to deist. An atheist is someone who believes that there is no God. A deist is someone who believes that there is a God, but he doesn't really want much to do with us. Sort of a grand designer, but not any more personal than that. To go from atheist to belief in some kind of God, first you would look at the arguments from a first cause or a prime mover. So I had a buddy named Kyle that I was talking with shortly before I left Saskatoon to come here, and we went out for lunch, and he asked me, "Why do you believe in God? Why do you believe that he exists?" I said, "Okay, what do you believe everything came from?" He said, "The Big Bang." Okay, perfect. Let's start there. What came before that? I don't know. Like, no one had ever asked him that question before. He said, "I don't know. Maybe like another Big Bang." Okay, well, what about before that? Well, another? And I started asking him, and we go back and back and back, and I say, so as hard as it is to comprehend, there must have been something that was always there that has no beginning. You can't go back forever. Something has to have always been there that got everything else started. He said, "Yeah, I guess that must be true." And I said, if nothing came before it and it started everything after, that must have a will. He said, "Oh, yeah, I could agree with that." And I said, and you see this design in the universe, everything kind of comes together, it coheres, it sustains. There must be an intelligence there. He said, "I guess you could say that too." And I said, and whatever brings everything else into existence, it must be so powerful as to be unlimited, or so close as to make no difference, as to be all powerful. And he said that would make sense too. I said that's a picture of God that only a very few religions believe in, and Christianity is one of them. Then you can look at the arguments for an intelligent designer. If you look around, there's a number of things that are required for there to be life on planet Earth. The conditions have to be just right. Everything has to be just so in order for there to be life on planet Earth. Everything coming together is in its own way miraculous. And so people who are more scientifically minded, when they look at the universe, they see something is causing this to come together and causing it to sustain and causing it to be a place where life can happen in the first place. And they'll say there's something to that there must be something. Don't know what it is, but there must be something. And so there's many people who don't necessarily believe in Christianity, but they could be caused to believe that there is something out there. You know, you step out into the street today, and you look at man's design, which is the torn up highway, and then you look at God's design, which is all the trees and the clouds and everything around, and you say, this is beautiful. There's order here. There's something in nature. This didn't happen by accident. Somebody made this. And even the most hard-hearted person, sometimes you can take them out into the midst of this and say, do you really just feel like you're looking at a mistake? And they say, okay, maybe there is something going on. So step one, you go from atheist to deist. Step two, from deist, there is a God, but he doesn't want much to do with us, to theist. There is a God, and he wants to have a relationship with you and me. Isn't that exciting? So the God who created the universe, the stars and the planets, and everything in them, the galaxies, nebulae, everything, he loves you and me. He wants us to come to him. He wants to have a relationship with us. He wants to be our God, and we get to be his people. That's an amazing message, because when you think about who God is and what he has done, it doesn't make sense that he would need us, and yet he wants us. That's what we believe as Christians, that there isn't just something out there, but that he loves us, and he wants us to come to him, and that's good news. And so you go from deist to theist. What sign is there that God wants anything to do with you and me? The first one would be this argument from morality and consciousness. So this says, all of us, no matter our upbringing, no matter our background, no matter our culture, we all have this inner sense that there is right and wrong. It's not all just doing what would get us the best result. It's not all just survival of the fittest. When someone says that clearly that they're selfish and they're going to get what they deserve, what they need, no matter what, we don't think, wow, you're especially well adapted to human life. We think you're a sociopath, right? Get away from me. But we lift up these images of people who sacrifice themselves, sacrifice their own heritage, their own family, their own everything for the sake of others. Why do we all value that? We all have a basic idea of getting along and helping one another. There's this consciousness in us that wherever you go, there's a law written on our heart, and a law implies a lawgiver. That there's someone who we are drawing this from, that there's an image of God in our hearts. And if we have the sense of right and wrong that doesn't just come from what we were taught or what's advantageous for us, that this must come from God who created us. C.S. Lewis, in Mere Christianity, he talks about this. He says, some people say the idea of a law of nature known to all men is unsound because different civilizations and ages have had quite different moralities. But these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. If anyone will take the trouble to compare the moral teaching of, say, the ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, what will really strike him will be how very like they are to each other and to our own. And so if there's a similarity, even though we're not communicating with each other, even though we're not getting our traditions from the same place, it must be because God has impressed upon our consciousness an impression of who he is, of his version of right and wrong, of his morality. We're drawing from him. The next would be arguments for the existence of the soul. Now, I almost didn't include this because some of it can seem a little bit fanciful, and there are some that have books about this that are not well sourced and that kind of thing. But actually, there are some things that point to the existence of the soul that actually show up in medical journals. So, for example, this is taken from a particular book that I'll share with you guys later. The Lancet, which is a well-regarded medical journal in Britain, published an account of a patient who was brought into the hospital not breathing after cardiac arrest. A male nurse removed the man's dentures and tucked them into the drawer of a crash cart. A week later, in another room, the patient regained consciousness. When the nurse came in, the patient recognized him saying, "You took my dentures out of my mouth," and proceeded to precisely describe how the nurse had put them in the bottom drawer of a specific cart. The nurse said, "I was especially amazed because I remembered this happening while the man was in a deep coma and in the process of CPR. When I asked further, it appeared the man had seen himself lying in bed, that he had perceived from above how nurses and doctors had been busy with CPR." This is an amazing story. Don't pass this up. If what this is saying is true, and this is not just someone recounting their own story, this is in a medical journal. I even gave the volume number so you could find it later. It's saying that not only did God just create us as meat and bones and neurons and just things that would come into existence and then pass away, but he created us with something permanent about us, something that would go on to exist after our physical body dies, something that would go to be with him. Would a God that doesn't want any relationship with us do that? I don't think so. That implies really strongly that God has created us and still wants a relationship with us. He's still involved in each of our lives. He made us to be with him. Okay, next, the arguments for the existence of miracles. This actually ties, let me see this. This actually ties into our persecuted country of the week. Candy Gunther Brown earned her undergraduate degree, summa cum laude, master's degree, and doctorate at Harvard. She is professor of religious studies at the sprawling Indiana University, which has 48,000 students at its campus. A scrupulous scholar eager to maintain academic neutrality, Brown takes a non-sectarian approach to religious studies. "I do not assume the existence or non-existence of a," that should read deity, "or other superhuman forces," she explains. And then her research actually took her into Mozambique. Here's what happened in Mozambique. I'm going to read from a book called The Case for Miracles by Lee Strobel. And if we don't have it in our library, I'll donate my copy, and we will. To go to a place that is reporting clusters of healing, Brown and her team flew to Mozambique, where reports of miracles abound. Located on the southeast coast of Africa, this desperately poor nation of 25 million people underwent a devastating civil war from 1977 to 1992. Slightly half of the country is Christian, 18% are Muslims, and the rest have animism beliefs or don't claim any religion at all. Mozambique fits 4 characteristics that Christian author Tim Stafford said are often shared by places where there are outbreaks of the supernatural. Number 1, there's illiteracy. Miracles show God's power without language. Number 2, people don't have a framework in their culture for theological concepts like sin and salvation, and so miracles demand attention even if you don't yet grasp the nature of your problem and God's redemption. Number 3, there's limited medical care, making miracles the only recourse for the afflicted. And number 4, the spirit world is very real to people, and a conflict of spiritual powers is out in the open, so miracles are demonstrations of God's power. To connect with a ministry that reports a high success rate with healing, Brown's team worked with Heidi and Roland Baker, charismatic missionaries serving in Mozambique, for more than 20 years. They have described how healing miracles have accompanied the spread of the gospel there. Brown focused on the healing of blindness and deafness, or severe vision or hearing problems, which aren't susceptible to psychosomatic healings, which is we think that we feel fine, and so we report that we are, but we're not really. So they're not susceptible to that kind of thing. You either see better or you don't. You hear better or you don't, and we can test those. That's what she's looking at. She says the length of the prayer varied from 1 minute to 5 minutes, but it always involved touching. Heidi put her arms around her, smiled at her, hugged her, cried and prayed for a minute, and afterwards the woman was able to read. In all, there were 24 subjects who received prayer. The results, after prayer, Candy says, we found a highly significant improvement in hearing and statistically significant improvements in vision. We saw improvement in almost every single subject we tested. Some of the results were quite dramatic. We had 2 subjects whose hearing thresholds were reduced by more than 50 decibels, which is quite a large reduction, she said. For comparison, 100 decibels is the sound of a nearby motorcycle or power lawnmower. 80 decibels is the sound of a garbage disposal or food blender. 50 decibels is the sound of a typical conversation at home, and 0 decibels is silence. Brown mentioned the story of Martine, an elderly blind and deaf woman in Numino Village. Before prayer, she had no response at 100 decibels in either ear, which meant she could not hear a jackhammer if it was being used next to her. After prayer, she responded at 75 decibels in her right ear and 40 decibels in her left ear, which meant she could make out conversations. After a second prayer, Martine's eyesight improved from 20/400 to 20/80 on the vision chart. This could mean she was legally blind initially, but after prayer, she was able to see objects from 20 feet away in the same way a person with normal vision can see that object from 80 feet away. And so these are examples of the miraculous happening all around, of people going in and testing this and saying, we're not testing this as Christians, we're not testing this as people who already believe in miracles, we're just seeing whether people could hear at first and whether they could hear after. We're just seeing whether people could see at first and whether they could see after. And they're testing these things and they're finding that these people are incredibly healed after being prayed for. And so are there miracles being done in our own day? Is the miraculous around us, or at least close enough that we could fly and get there to where these things are happening? Yes. Are these things being examined by those who are not coming from an explicitly Christian approach, and yet they're saying, we also believe it seems that there are miracles happening here? Yeah, that's true too. Isn't that amazing? We can point to the existence of the soul. We can point to the existence of miracles. We can look at our own consciousnesses, and we can see not only has God created, not only is there a God, and not only has God created us, but He has created us for relationship with Him. And that brings up the question, if He's created us for relationship with Him, how has He revealed Himself? How has He shown Himself? Well, then we would go from theist, so there is a God somewhere out there, and He's created us for relationship with Him, and now we get down to how has He revealed Himself? And so we come down to not quite Christian, but Abrahamic. These are religions that believe that God has revealed Himself in the Bible, that He has revealed Himself through His Word, that He has done things in history, and we can examine that. And so we're going to go through this very quickly, and partly the reason for that is because as I preach regularly here at the church, I'm weaving these things in. And so I can tell you where we have looked at this before and where we will look at this soon. So we spent more time on the last one. So from theist to Abrahamic, which is maybe Jewish, they believe in the Old Testament. Maybe Muslim. Theoretically, they believe in the Bible. They just don't believe it's been transmitted correctly. Baha'i faith would come from that tradition. Sikhism, possibly, kind of. It's a little bit of a weird case. And there are others. Mormonism would believe, in some sense, that God has revealed Himself in the Bible. So how do we get someone at least to that point where they say, there's something about the Bible. Don't know if I'm a Christian yet, but there's something to this. Well, there would be the argument from archaeology. I love this one. You can go into almost any book of the Bible, almost any passage, and you can dig up examples of where the Bible says so-and-so was a king at this time, and you can find that in the archaeology. You can see examples of events that happened, and you can find accounts of those same events from the other end in the archaeological record. One of my favorites is from Isaiah. There's a guy named Sennacherib who lays a siege against Judah, and he's ready to take it. And we hear this, the account of this in Isaiah. And then archaeologically, we actually have the same account from Sennacherib, from his angle, talking about how he had Hezekiah, the king of Judah, trapped in the city like a bird in a cage. And he says, the one who came out to reason with me, I turned him back to his misery. And then as you're reading that, you're like, wait, I have the Bible. I know the name of the guy who came out to talk to him, right? And these things tie together. And I wish I could go further into that. We will go further into that when we go into the book of Daniel next year. But I just want to share this quote from you. It says, Lester Grabb, professor at the University of Hull in England, compares the biblical and archaeological records. He concludes his comparison by drawing up 4 lists. A, the biblical data that are confirmed. B, the biblical data that are not confirmed, but that could well be correct. C, the biblical data that are incorrect. And D, data that biblical authors omit or ignore. This is someone coming from a non-Christian perspective. Hence, cautious statements like that made by Eric Klein, Associate Director of the current excavations at Megiddo. He says, in no case has the biblical account of an event of the first millennium BCE, before Common Era, yet been shown by an extra-biblical inscription to be completely false. So what he's saying is out of that category of 4 options, there's things that that are confirmed. There's things that are not confirmed but could be correct. There's things that are incorrect. And there's things that the biblical authors omit. He says option C, that there's things that are incorrect. He says that doesn't exist. We haven't found that yet. And this is a guy coming from a non-Christian background. So there's the argument from archaeology. There's the argument from the antiquity of the documents. When I was a new Christian, some people would tell me, I don't believe in that Bible stuff because I'm pretty sure that Constantine, the Roman emperor, changed all of that to just support himself. And so we don't even know what Jesus said. And the answer to that would be, we have copies of every book of the New Testament and every book of the Old Testament from before the time of Constantine. So let's say that someone had come along and changed the Bible and altered it. We would know exactly where they had done so, and we'd be able to say, I caught you. You got you right there. And we would find out exactly where that happened. There's a whole discipline devoted to that called textual criticism, which we talked about during a Sunday morning Bible study a few months ago before summer. And these documents are so old, they go back right to the time of the events that they're talking about, and we can examine that in different ways. The people who report on these events, they have the authority to do so because they were there, and we can know that they were there. There's the argument from historical fulfillment of prophecy. Throughout the Bible, there's things that we see being told about ahead of time, and then we see them come to pass. We see that most famously in messianic prophecy, but there's other things as well. I remember Kendra was reading, I forget which something from Jeremiah, and it was talking about what would happen to one of the nations, and just the physical characteristics of what it would be like, that it would be changed from one kind of environment to another kind of environment. And she stopped and she put down her Bible and she got out her phone and she Googled it, and she went, it's exactly like the Bible said it would be. It's been fulfilled. We actually see this come to pass. And there's many, many, many other things exactly like that. There's also source critical analysis. As you examine these books, you find out that not only is this one book, but it's 66 books. And not only is it 66 books, but it's drawn from other sources that are then put together to make up the books. And so you can find out that not only are there 4 Gospels, but each of the Gospels have their own sources. And we can sort of tease these out a little bit. And as you examine that, as you look at that, you can see that when the book was written is fairly early, but then the sources behind that are even earlier. These go right to the time and to the life of Jesus. And then bonus, there's an argument from the Bible's self-authentication, which means there's something about, as you read this, as you come to understand it, it starts to explain your life, and it explains the human condition, and it explains things all around us, and why things are the way that they are, in a way that nothing else just really does. There's a guy I know, he's a pastor, and he runs mostly small groups, and his father-in-law is an atheist, and he says, my father-in-law hasn't quite come to the point where he is ready to commit to faith in Jesus, but he says, when I read the Gospels, he says when he reads the Gospels, he says there's something about Jesus' teachings that is miraculous. He says there's something about his teachings that is miraculous. And he says, but I don't believe in miracles, so what's a man to do? There's something about Jesus' teachings that is miraculous. It explains things better. It makes more sense of things than anything else. This random group of people in the Middle East, this random guy walking around Judea, is able to explain our lives to us better than the wisdom of all of the greatest philosophers of Greece and Rome. I think that's amazing. Step 4, from Abrahamic, I have a general respect for the Bible, I suppose, to Christians specifically. There's an argument from Messianic prophecy. I've got a few sermons. I've got one whole series from last year when we went through Advent that shows how the Old Testament points forward to Jesus and who he is. We went through Isaiah in a series of 4 messages and really tried to spend some time during that series to show how Isaiah really specifically points forward to Jesus, not to the promise of someone coming in general, not to the idea that someday something will get better, not to a mysterious figure, but to Jesus specifically. It could only be fulfilled in him. There's many, many other things all throughout the Old Testament like this. I'm really excited to get into Daniel, where we'll talk about this. And I do have a message just on Messianic prophecy coming up in a couple of weeks after this series. The argument from historical Jesus research. This will be a message as well. We can know, even without assuming faith in the Bible, on historical grounds, using historical methods, we can know that Jesus was a real person, that he did everything, well, most of the things that the Bible says that he did, coming from just a non-Christian perspective, looking at just the historical data and not assuming the truth of the Bible. And it's amazing when you come from just a historical, non-believing approach to say, how many things in the Bible can we believe happened? If we made a list of all the things, it would read like a Christian statement of faith of who Jesus is. There's so little that historians are not able to say is true about Jesus that they really have to start splitting hairs. So they can't say Jesus resurrected, otherwise that would be a statement of faith. So they have to say he was believed by his closest followers to be resurrected, which they would have been in a position to know, right? They can't say Jesus is God, but they would have to say Jesus was believed in his own day to be God, that kind of thing. So they've gotten so far and confirmed so much that they have to split hairs like that in order to avoid saying essentially Christian things. So that's historical Jesus research. The argument from the resurrection, Jesus rose, and we know that that happened. We know that there are people during that time who would have loved to be able to say that was not a thing that occurred, and they weren't able to produce a body. They weren't able to say, here is Jesus, here's what happened with him. The people who were closest to Jesus, who were in a place to know for sure whether he had resurrected and appeared to them, each one of them went to their grave, sometimes being violently persecuted, saying, no, Jesus rose. Now, there are people who are persecuted for their faith, for other faiths, all the time. The difference between them and the apostles is people of other faiths, you go, well, I grew up in this, I've accepted this, even us, and so I believe this to be true. The apostles were asked, did Jesus rise? Did he appear to you? Did you spend some time with him? And they said, yes. Well, if you say yes, we're going to kill you. Well, go ahead. The answer is yes. And they were in a position to know for sure, and they said yes. Argument from undesigned coincidences. There are things in the Gospels that just make sense together. They point towards each other, and yet it's not on purpose. So there's a discussion I had with a Redeemer student, went off to the campus on Friday and walked around for a bit. And he was asking me something about communion, because there's something in John that might suggest a particular view of what communion is. And he said, so what do you think about that? I said, well, John doesn't actually portray the Last Supper. So if he was trying to draw that comparison, you think he would kind of draw the connections together and show the Last Supper. And he said, I never realized that he didn't do that. And the reason that he didn't realize that John never did that is because there's so many things that tie together. There's an explanation of one part of an event that is then explained from a different angle on in another gospel. And each of them are talking about the same thing, but neither of them know about each other. But both of their pictures fit together like Lego bricks. And so there's something in the undesigned coincidences, not on purpose, but accidental, where they just fit together just like so. And that helps us to see they are talking about one story. They're describing one thing that actually occurred. There's also the argument from early church witnesses. There's a group of early church authors that I didn't get to talk to you about when we went through the Apostles' Creed, but they're called the Apostolic Fathers. They are so early that they knew the apostles. Like they knew Peter and Paul personally. And so they're able to describe what these guys were like, what they actually went through, and what their witness to the Christian faith was. And so we can go off of that. Now, there's many options. We can go from many options to one option. We can talk about what about no religion? Well, then where did all of this come from? What about other religions? Is there anything that has the evidential basis that Christianity has, all the things that I just took you through? Looking at skepticism of the gap, sometimes something will be confirmed in the Bible that was previously denied. And so then people will come up with a new way to deny it. So David was one of these. When I was in high school, David the king supposedly did not exist. Then by the time I was in college, he did exist. That was confirmed, but he was supposedly nothing like what is in the Bible, didn't rule over a big kingdom like the Bible describes. Then we're finding examples archaeologically of his kingdom being a little bit more far-flung than was claimed. And so now they're finding new ways to deny what the Bible says, but their picture keeps getting closer to the biblical picture. So there's a skepticism of the gaps. Wherever there's a gap in information, they insert disbelief. but then that circle of disbelief gets smaller and smaller and smaller as time goes on. What about just being spiritual? Look, if there is a God who created you for relationship with him, don't you believe that he would work to reveal himself to you and to us, to humanity as a whole? Wouldn't you expect that there would be something that he would show himself to be so that we could come to know him? One person actually asked me, what about aliens? Hey, if we're talking about the supernatural, shouldn't we, what if Jesus is an alien? And it threw me for a second. And then I thought, well, okay, but then you go back to where did we all come from? Where did the universe come from, right? You still have to get down to that fundamental question. Who's responsible for everything, including, I suppose, the aliens? He said, that's a good question. So if they showed up tomorrow and said, hey, you come from us, I guess my question to them would be, well, where did you come from? Who made you, right? And he said, oh, that's a good answer. So I guess if there's any of you in here wondering about aliens, I have you covered. Okay, looking at the tests of knowing. How do we know stuff? How do we come to form opinions on things? The one question is, does it make the most sense? This is logical, philosophical reasoning. This is like when we start talking about what comes first, what comes before that, what comes before that. This is logical reasoning. Second question, is there evidence? What's the evidence for something? That's like when we went into archaeology. Can you dig things up out of the ground and find things that agree with the biblical description? Does it work? As you apply the Bible to your life, does it make your life look differently than the lives of those around you in a positive way? The answer is yes, and we're going to specifically get into that in 2 weeks. Does it predict? Can you kind of predict what will happen or won't happen as someone applies this to their lives or as a culture comes closer or further away from this? I believe, yes, you can. Does it feel right? You know what? We don't always follow our feelings on everything, but to the extent that you can compare with anything else you could center your life around or follow, there is this peace, this unexplainable peace, that comes from knowing who God is and knowing that you have a relationship with him. It surpasses anything else. We call it a peace that passes understanding. And although we don't always experience it, many of you who are Christians have. And there's just something there where you go, I can't explain it, but I know that this is God working in my life. Lastly, there's in what's called epistemology, which is the discipline of how do we know stuff, of asking how do we know stuff. There's something called knowing by acquaintance, knowing by relationship with it. How do I know that my wife exists? Because I can give her a hug, right? Because I can talk to her and I can spend time with her. How do we know God by acquaintance? Well, 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and 2 say that there's something that happens in us spiritually. We are changed, we are transformed in a way that we don't understand. I look at my own life and I go, that wasn't me being different than I was before, isn't the result of my own self-discipline or just being really good at changing. It is something that God did in me that I can't explain apart from God. And so I know by acquaintance. So that's a lot altogether, and that's it's just running through a list of lots of things. I hope that was helpful for some of you. I did something like this in another church where most people were already Christians, and they just sort of sat and went, oh, I guess so. Like, I already believe in Jesus, so this doesn't really matter to me. And then I went and I did this in a room full of college and university students where they're getting this challenged all the time every week, and they were on the edge of their chairs, right? If you have someone in your life who is not a Christian, who is still searching these things out, my hope is that this little map of different ways that we can reason out the Christian faith is helpful to you. And this will be recorded and put up online later. Now, I just want to make take a couple of minutes and allow you guys to ask me some questions.